kind of random.
What up, y'all? Welcome to another Hip Hop Now podcast review. I am your host, Vegas of Hip Hop Now podcast. Support the Patreon at patreon.com/hiphopnow. Please know that this podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. All you got to do is search for the words Hip Hop Now podcast, subscribe, and get locked in. Well. 2020. You know what? You something else. You are something else. Not something else, but something. So here we are. Electronica. 2 albums in 2020. The first being the Jay-Z assisted, or you might as well say the group, Jay-Z and Electronica. An album called A Written Testimony. An album that I kind of have in my top 5 of the year still. I'm sorry. I don't want to burst your bubble. But if you want to check out that review, the link is in the description of this very episode. But we're not here to talk about that, right? That was released. A lot of people were disappointed. A lot of people kind of like it. A lot of people felt like Electronica didn't come through in the way we thought he would because it wasn't a solo album. The main running theme was the fact that we waited basically 10 years for his debut Roc Nation album. And we got a collaborative album with Jay-Z. And this is no shade, but Jay-Z outshines Electronica on that project. So needless to say, Electronica fans weren't completely satisfied, even though I liked the album a lot, as you can tell by having it in my top 5 of the year so far. It still wasn't what I was expecting after waiting 10 years. Well, guess what happens? I do a podcast in January of 2020, basically saying 2 different things, right? In that same podcast, which will be linked in the description, I say that Jay-Z will either release a new album or more likely release a collaborative album. Never thought it would be with Electronica. But I also said, and this is in my a written testimony review, that this can't be the only thing we're getting from Electronica. We waited 10 years for his solo debut. It can't be a compilation with one of the biggest rappers of all time. It just can't be that. I figured it'd be an official release, but lo and behold, it was a leak. So here's the story. Electronica's 2012 album, Act 2, The Patents of Nobility, was supposed to be released in 2012. Obviously, it was never released until recently. Well, let's take out the word release and put in the word leak. And I'm putting up air quotes for that. So apparently some person owned this album and put it up for sale and was going to release it to the public if people paid a sum of $9,000. Now, not $9,000 each in total. Well, you know how the internet go. Depends on how bad people want it. And people wanted it bad enough to chip in and get this $9,000 to this person, and so we have now the album leaked. Obviously, all over the internet, everybody's talking about it. People reviewing it instantly, calling it an instant classic, calling it trash, calling it, I see why they, didn't release this, saying it's beautiful. Just the range of emotions about this album is just up and down. And the main thing is and also Electronica was very appreciative of the love, because regardless of the different emotions I just went through as far as the reactions from listeners, on first listens, impressions, I would say, because the album wasn't really out for that long before people decided what they felt about it, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it just seemed like so many people felt so strongly after the album just being out for like what felt like a couple of hours. But Electronica was very humbled by the amount of love he was receiving for this project. And then came Monday and Tidal decided, whoa, we're losing a lot of money on this. We're losing a lot of streams on this. and they officially put it on Tidal exclusively. Now, it's leaked. It's 2020. If you really want the album and you don't have Tidal, you can get it. If you want to support Tidal, I would encourage that. Chances are it will appear on other streaming platforms, but for right now, if you want the exclusive, I guess, and especially probably highest quality version of the album, you can go there. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, man, all this rhetoric, but dog, we've been waiting 12 years to hear this album in particular, so I'm going to take my time. So lo and behold, the album's out. I listened to it a couple of times. You know how it go with these reviews with me. I give it a good listen, probably 3 to 4 times before I make my mind up. But this album is totally different from a written testimony, because this is what they said we was gonna get. Now, this is what I feel off the rip. This is how I feel about the album. I like it, but I'm also skeptical about it. I remember an album throughout the years as we pondered whether it would ever be released. I remember an album that Just Blaze and Young Guru, talked about and said how dope it was and how it was done. And Just Blaze specifically saying how much it was done, and then all of a sudden you just didn't hear anything else. I don't think we got the album he was referring to. Now, I'm not saying there's a completely different album out there. I think there's an album out there that features a lot of these songs, if not most of them, but it has a different vibe to it. Because remember, Just Blaze's production, usually you can, and I'm not talking about when he tags it, but usually you can tell when it's Just Blaze. And there's maybe one record on here that I would feel like maybe Just Blaze did that. I could be wrong. I'm not sure, but it just feels a lot more like something that Roc Nation reworked and planned to release in 2012, and kind of probably took a lot of what Just Blaze had put on there off, or reworked it, or whatever the case. But it does sound like a cohesive album. Now, there are two things that I want to, not two things, but there's one thing that I want to say, if you're wondering, with all that being said and me not even really going through the album yet, about this album. I think there are two J Electronica fan bases. And I use that fan base in air quotes. I think there are the people who jumped aboard when they heard Style Wars. That was the EP that he kind of had back in the MySpace days, that features some Dilla production and others. But the takeaway was Eternal Sunshine, The Pledge. That was the unique song, the 9-minute song that had the unique production, unique flow from J Electronica. I feel like there's a certain sect of fans that know that J Electronica, Eternal Sunshine J Electronica fans. Then there are the Exhibit C fans. And I know some people who like Eternal Sunshine also like Exhibit C. That's kind of a given. But the Exhibit C fans, the ones who probably really jumped aboard with that, really sold on him with that, they're a different type of fan. And I think those fans are the ones who really don't find this album appealing. But I think the Eternal Sunshine fans love it, because it's exactly what you thought you was going to get from a debut album of J Electronica when you heard Eternal Sunshine, The Pledge. I'm more in the Eternal Sunshine. I don't mind the Exhibit C J Electronica, but I never thought he was that. Now, you talking about Exhibit C coming out in 2009. Also, Exhibit A was released in 2009. And Style Wars being either 2009 or 2008. And you're talking about a debut album that was supposed to be released in 2012 after he signed to Roc Nation. But before he signed to Roc Nation, Just Blaze was talking about the album was done. So if you know Jay Electronica's history, you understand why this isn't a normal review by any stretch of the imagination. And when I say I think Roc Nation reworked it, is because of songs like Road to Perdition and the song that we've heard a million times over and over again, Shiny Suit Theory, which also appears on this album but is referred to as Dinner at Tiffany's. A lot of these songs, a couple of these songs we've heard before, but that typically happens with an album that was shelved, right? You do wind up hearing a couple of songs here and there from that album. Those songs all appear on here, and we've all heard them. Most of us have heard them, including, there's another record, Letter to Fallon, I heard before. Better in Tune with the Infinite, I also heard before. Some of these joints were released as singles. Some of them released as singles on Tidal over the years. But when you listen to them in the context of the album, you realize they were all meant for this project. The segues feel natural. A Written Testimony felt like a collection of songs, a couple of dope songs that I like, but it felt like a collection of songs. This feels like an album. This feels like a mission. This feels like there was a concept with this album, Patents of Nobility, right? That theme plays throughout this album, in his lyrics, in his songs, in his song titles, in the skits he chooses to use. There's not many features on here. Jay-Z's featured on here twice, one being Shiny Suit Theory, where you get a verse, and Road to Perdition, where you really just get like ad-libs from Jay-Z. The kids cheering that you would hear in Shiny Suit Theory, it's a theme throughout the album. Now it makes me think, oh, so that was supposed to be something you heard on the album. But I still don't feel like this is the Just Blaze version. Another thing that tripped me up about this album before I start getting into what I like and dislike is the fact that there are references throughout this album, maybe one or two, that suggest something fishy going on, right? This is supposed to be a leaked album from the year 2012. And the very first song, the beginning, which one is that? Real Magic, featuring Ronald Reagan, of all people. Jay Electronica makes a reference towards getting a lot of BBM messages. Now, if you know, like I know, who using a BlackBerry, let alone getting BBM messages in 2020? Not many people, if at all. BBM is dead. BlackBerry's kind of still around, but not as popular as it was at a time like 2009, 2010, 2012, maybe. It was already fading around those times. But you get what I'm saying. So that says, oh yeah, this is older. But then there are other references that kind of reference 2020 and falling back and chilling with Hove. Now, either Jay Electronica is just a prophet or something funny. Something was planned. Maybe it was promoted as a leak to build hype, but it actually was a controlled leak. They had that album ready for Tidal. It was up the next day. Now, sure, you can go ahead and make sure that happens quick. It doesn't take much to do that, but at the same time, it just seemed like it was made available very quickly. I think it was worked on a little bit. I think, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, is I think it was planned to be released later in the year, especially because of how people reacted to not getting that solo album and getting a Written Testimony with Jay-Z. So those are all my theories on the album and everything that surrounds it and the build up to it. Let's get into basically why I like it. I like the album in context that this is supposed to be a 2012 release. Jay Electronica has always been this type of rapper. Exhibit C is really the only record from him that sounds like that. Exhibit A doesn't sound like that. Exhibit A sounds like this album. It really does. Now, not everyone's going to be a fan of his philosophies, his views on religion, and the different things he talks about, like Illuminati and stuff like that. Honestly, I think that's Jay Electronica's biggest draw, if you ask me, because he's political, he's religious, he's street, he's lyrical. He's a lot like Killer Priest, to be honest. I thought he was Killer Priest when I first heard him back in the days. But I really didn't expect anything on the level of Exhibit C when I heard his album. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't mind it. But what we got, I kind of like. Now, I will say this. It's 15 tracks. It's about a little bit under an hour long. Again, Jay-Z's featured on here. The Dreams featured on here. There are a couple of other features on here, but there are a lot of records that speak to his life, that speak to his insecurities, that speak to his religion, his fears, his strengths. It's a very melodic and thought-provoking album lyrically. I don't feel at any point on this album I was completely blown away by the lyrics. What I like about the album is I like the vibe because it's 100% Jay Electronica's vibe. That is his vibe. Some may find it boring or or hard to follow. And nothing's wrong with that. Because I feel like Jay Electronica, when I first heard Eternal Sunshine, I realized this is an acquired taste in hip hop. This is different. This isn't anything you can hit play on and have expectations. This is listen and soak in and realize that everything that's placed on this album, from the skits to the beats, is done with purpose. Now, does that mean the execution is where it should be? I don't feel like that is the case throughout. I feel like there are some songs where I would have wanted a little bit more bars and less singing or less of the hook or whatever elements he had in the song. I feel like that's cool sometimes, but I feel like that's more acceptable on a longer album, maybe a couple of more songs. Especially towards the end where I feel like the momentum starts to taper off, like this one record in particular where I had to look down. I was like, wait a minute, is this a freestyle or are he forgetting bars or whatever? And I think it's done purposely, but I don't think the execution is on the same level as Book of Rhymes from Nas off the Godson album, where you could tell the goal was to just read these bars that he just had randomly on pages. And it was set up that way so you never looked like, oh, finish that verse. You knew it was an unfinished verse. But with Jay Electronica, it kind of comes out of nowhere because the first half of the album, for the most part, is very complete and cohesive, and it flows in a specific way. And I feel like they didn't close out in that same way. It feels like something's missing from the end, or there could have been more placed in there to fill it out. So, in summary, if you are a person who was a day one, maybe MySpace, or maybe not even being on MySpace, maybe your first experience was hearing Eternal Sunshine off the Star Wars EP, and you feel like that's the Jay Electronica I like, that's the Jay Electronica I know, Exhibit A, Road to Perdition, or any of those types of vibes, I think you might love this album. If you're a person who was expecting a solo album on par with Exhibit C, or even an album that has the same energy as a written testimony, as far as those beats, I think you're going to be disappointed. Now, again, this is an album supposedly that was supposed to drop in 2012, so keep that in mind. That the goal was for this album to come out in 2012. Now, real quick, let's talk about why didn't it come out, right? Because from what I hear on this album, I don't see why not. But if you're thinking about it coming off the heels of Exhibit C, then yeah, there's nothing like Exhibit C on here. It would be like fool's gold to somebody who loved Exhibit C, because there's nothing like it on here. Nothing even close to it. That energy, nothing close to it on here. But I also, and shout out to my homie Ak, who we kind of discussed all these different points. But I kind of felt like, looking at the year before, the year of, and the year after, Jay-Z is the type of executive in the record business and an artist who likes timing. He likes to strike when the time is right. That's why sometimes in his later albums, they just come out. And I think it's because we keep our heads low, we're not anticipating a Jay-Z album, and then boom, he springs it upon us. And I think he's all about timing. And I think in 2012, I believe, you had albums like, maybe not 2012, maybe more like 2011, around 2012, but I believe it's 2012. You did have like Watch the Throne. It was around that time, somewhere around that time. You did have a couple of joints. Matter of fact, it was 2011. You had Watch the Throne, and you had a couple of joints where you could see maybe they want to springboard Jay Electronica off of, the whole Rock Nation, Kanye connection, Jay-Z connection. But the time wasn't right. 2012, you had Life is Good and you had Good Kid, Mad City. Now, just naming some of these albums and listening to this album, it would get forgotten. It would get lost in the dust. Those were some big years. Those few albums released in 2011 and 2012 alone, they had all the attention that year. And I think they wanted Jay Electronica to be bigger than that. So let's say if they like, okay, let's push it to 2013. Well, in 2013, Drake drops Nothing Will Be the Same. I think that's the name of that album. Pusha T drops My Name Is My Name. Like, it just wasn't a lane for Jay Electronica to get the spotlight in the way that I believe Rock Nation wanted him to have it. But I don't believe this was the album for this. This was the album we should have got when Exhibit A was out. Exhibit C is not even on this album. That says a lot about what happened or Just Blaze's involvement. It's really fishy. So all in all, I feel like it's a good album. I don't feel like it's in my top 5 of the year. I feel like I still like the energy of A Written Testimony more. I feel like this is a specific vibe that's an acquired taste for a certain type of listener, whether you be a music listener in general or a certain type of hip-hop fan. But I do not believe that anybody who heard Exhibit C and was like, man, I can't wait for that debut. I've been waiting years. I can't believe that anybody who feels like that will like this album at all. That's going to do it for me. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at VegasWorldINC. Check out the Patreon page. The link is in the description, patreon.com/hiphopnow. And please remember to share this podcast, which is available everywhere you go, on iOS, Android, your computer, whatever. Share this podcast with anybody you know. Enjoy this kind of hip-hop content. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace. Drop it on the random.